The night I found out my father had stolen from my dead husband, I was sitting at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, with Eli asleep in the next room, and 4 years of bank statements spread out in front of me. Eli had just turned 4 the week before. We'd had a little party, just us and my friend Dana and her kids, because that's all I could afford. I'd made his cake from scratch, chocolate with sprinkles, and when he blew out the candles, he asked me if Daddy could see him from heaven. I told him yes. I told him Daddy was watching and so proud of him. Then I went to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub for 6 minutes before I could go back out and smile again. Marcus had been gone for 11 months. A drunk driver ran a red light on the I-78 at 11:15 on a Tuesday night. Marcus was coming home from a late client dinner. He was 32 years old. He had a gym bag in the back seat, a receipt from a gas station in his jacket pocket, and 317 unread emails, which I know because I had to go through his phone the week after the funeral, and I couldn't stop myself from opening the inbox. I don't know why I needed to know that number. I still do. The life insurance was $640,000. That is not a small amount of money. That is the kind of money that means your 4-year-old goes to college. That means you don't have to lie awake, calculating whether you can afford the copay on his allergy medication and still cover rent. Marcus had bought the policy 2 years into our marriage, because he was careful that way, because he thought about the future, because he loved us in a way that was quiet and steady and permanent, until it wasn't. My father had offered to help me set up the trust. I want you to understand that, because it matters. I was 28 years old and my husband had just died, and I couldn't read a sentence to the end without losing the thread of it. My father sat across from me at his dining room table, in the house I grew up in, and he said, "Let me handle this, sweetheart. You focus on Eli. I'll make sure everything is protected." He was the one who suggested he be named trustee. He was the one who explained it would be simpler that way, more efficient, that it was just a formality, that of course it was still my money and Eli's future. He said all of this in the same tone of voice he used when he taught me to drive, patient and certain and completely full of lies. I was a CPA. I want you to understand that too. I had a master's degree in forensic accounting. I had spent 6 years catching financial fraud for other people's families. I had sat across from crying wives and devastated husbands, and walked them through exactly how someone they trusted had taken everything from them. And I had still handed my father control of $640,000 because grief does something to your brain that no degree protects you from. Grief takes the part of you that knows better, and wraps it in cotton wool, and puts it somewhere dark and quiet where it can't bother you while you're just trying to make it to the next hour. I noticed the discrepancy because of Eli's pediatric bill. It was a small thing, a routine visit that should have been covered by the trust disbursement I'd requested 2 months earlier. My father had told me the transfer was delayed, something about a processing hold, nothing to worry about, but the hold had been going on since March. It was now October. I pulled the full account history at midnight because I couldn't sleep again. By 2 in the morning I had gone through all of it. The trust had been funded at $640,000 in January. It now held $9,212. I sat very still for a long time. Then I got up, checked on Eli, stood in the doorway of his room watching his chest rise and fall in the nightlight glow, and I thought very clearly, I am going to need to be careful about how I do this. I drove to my father's house the next evening. I had printed everything, organized it in a binder, highlighted the relevant transfers, 41 withdrawals over 9 months, every one of them authorized by my father as trustee. The money had moved to an LLC I'd never heard of, and when I looked up the LLC, it was registered to my brother Aaron's wife. My brother Aaron is 2 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one who got the car for his 16th birthday, the one whose college application my father personally edited, the one whose potential was discussed at family dinners, while I was told I was lucky to be pretty. When I got my CPA license at 24, my father took me to dinner and spent most of the meal talking about a deal Aaron was working on. When I got my master's, he said, "That's wonderful. Now make sure you don't let it make you difficult." I had spent my entire life being dismissed by these 2 men while working twice as hard as either of them, and I had spent most of that time telling myself it didn't matter, that I was above it, that I didn't need their approval. I needed to stop telling myself that. I knocked on my father's door at 6:30 on a Thursday. Aaron's truck was in the driveway, which I hadn't planned on but didn't change anything. My father opened the door, looked at the binder under my arm, and something moved across his face very fast. Not guilt exactly, more like calculation. "Maya," he said, "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," I said. "Can I come in?" He let me in. Aaron was in the living room with a glass of bourbon. He looked at the binder too. Neither of them said anything while I sat down and opened it to the first page and walked them through the numbers. I kept my voice level. I had prepared for this. I had done this in other people's living rooms, and I knew how to stay calm while everything is burning. My father let me finish. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Those were legitimate expenses. 41 transfers to an LLC registered to Aaron's wife," I said. "What were the expenses?" "Business investments. For the benefit of the trust." "Show me the documentation." Aaron put his glass down. "Maya, you need to calm down." "I am calm," I said. "I want the documentation for 41 transactions totaling $630,000 that left my son's trust." What happened next happened fast. My father stood up and said the transfers were legal, that he had full authority as trustee, that if I had a problem, I could take it up with his attorney. Aaron stood up and said I had been acting unstable since Marcus died. He actually said that, unstable, and that maybe this was grief talking and maybe I should see someone. My father said that if I was going to make accusations, I should leave. I said I wasn't leaving without documentation. Aaron said I needed to stop before I did something I'd regret. I said I'd already done something I regretted, which was trusting either of them with anything. Then my father said he was calling the police and telling them his grieving daughter had come to his home and made threatening statements and was refusing to leave. I looked at him. My father, the man who had coached my little league team, who had walked me down the aisle 3 years ago, who had held Eli in the hospital the night he was born, and cried in a way I had never seen him cry before or since. I looked at him and I understood, fully and completely, that he had made his choice, and it was not me. I picked up my binder, and I walked toward the door. Aaron stepped in front of me. He put his hand out for my keys. "You've been drinking," he said. "It was a lie. I'm not letting you drive. Get out of my way. I'll have someone take you home. Give me the keys, Maya." Here is what you need to understand about that moment. I had Eli at home with a babysitter. My phone was at 7% and I hadn't brought a charger. If I got into a physical altercation with my brother and my father called the police and I was the one who ended up arrested, I would lose everything, not just the money but any legal standing, any chance of fighting back the right way. I knew this. So I made the calculation, the terrible practical calculation, and I gave him my keys. He put them in his pocket. Then my father opened the front door, and I walked outside. It was 31 degrees. I had a coat but no gloves. I stood on the front porch and tried to call Dana, but the call failed. I tried to call my attorney, a friend from law school, not yet retained for this, just someone who would know what to do, and the call connected for 4 seconds, and then my phone died. I want to be very precise about the timeline because people always want to know why. Why didn't you leave? I had no car. I had no phone. It was dark and 31 degrees, and I was standing on a suburban street in Connecticut with a binder of financial documents that represented every dollar my dead husband had ever thought about the future. I walked. That was the answer. I walked down my father's street and turned left on Maple and kept going, because the 7-Eleven was 6 blocks away, and there was a payphone on the outside wall that I had noticed once, and filed away the way you file away things you hope you'll never need. I was 4 blocks from the 7-Eleven when a car slowed down beside me. The window came down. A woman said, "Honey, are you okay?" Her name was Patricia. She was 63 years old, and she was driving home from her book club, and she had a phone charger and a warm car, and she did not know me at all. She gave me 3% charge, enough to call Dana, enough to tell Dana to stay with Eli, and call my attorney friend, and tell her what had happened. Then Patricia drove me to Dana's house, and I sat on Dana's couch with a blanket and a cup of tea, and I looked at the binder on the coffee table, and I thought, very calmly, all right, we do this the hard way. What happened over the next 4 months is not a story of dramatic moments. It is a story of work. My attorney friend Claudia took my case the next morning. She had been waiting 7 years to argue a trustee fraud case of this size, and she described it as her white whale, which I found both reassuring and slightly alarming. We filed a motion to remove my father as trustee within the week. We subpoenaed the LLC records. We retained a forensic accounting firm. And yes, I found a particular satisfaction in being on this side of that table for once. My father hired his own attorneys. They argued the transfers were legitimate. They submitted documentation that was, and I say this with professional precision, impressive in how thoroughly and artlessly it was fabricated. I had looked at enough falsified records in my career to find the errors in under an hour. I made a list. Claudia submitted the list to the court. My brother stopped returning my calls. My aunt, my father's sister, called me twice to ask me to drop it, to think about the family, to consider what this would do to my father's reputation. I told her I was thinking about Eli's college fund. She stopped calling. I went back to work. I had left my position at my father's firm 8 months after Marcus died because the commute was too much with Eli's daycare schedule, or at least that was the reason I had given myself. The real reason was that Aaron had spent 3 years presenting my analysis in client meetings as his own, and my father had spent those same 3 years letting him. I freelanced for a while. Small contracts. Nothing significant. But now, I needed income, and I needed it to not be connected to my family in any way. So I applied for a senior analyst position at a firm in Hartford, and I got it, and I started in November in a gray wool blazer I'd bought at a consignment shop, and I did not tell anyone in that office anything about what was happening in my personal life. Eli was good. That's the thing I want to make sure is clear. He was 4.5 and he was good. He liked dinosaurs and oatmeal with too much brown sugar, and he had started this thing where he narrated everything he was doing in the third person. Eli is putting on his shoes now. Eli is very good at shoes, and sometimes when he did this I had to leave the room because it was so unbearably sweet, and I refused to cry in front of him. He asked about Daddy sometimes. I told him the truth in the ways that a 4-year-old can hold truth. I told him Daddy loved him so much that he made sure we'd be okay even after he was gone. I told him we were going to be okay. I needed to make that true. The legal process moved. It moved the way legal processes move, which is to say slowly and with enormous quantities of paperwork. But it moved. By February, the LLC records had been fully subpoenaed, and what they showed was exactly what I had suspected, a series of pass-through transfers that ultimately funded a vacation property in the Outer Banks, registered jointly to my father and Aaron, renovations to Aaron's house, 2 luxury cars, and what appeared to be a significant investment in a restaurant venture that had since failed. $630,000 that my husband had paid premiums on for 8 years and never gotten to see do a single thing for his son. In March, Claudia filed for criminal referral. This was when things changed in the way that things change, when there is suddenly a possibility of prosecution rather than just civil liability. My father's attorney began making settlement overtures. The calls came through Claudia, and they were not apologetic. They were strategic. They offered to return 60%, then 70%, then full restoration minus legal fees. Each time, Claudia conveyed the offer, and each time I said no, not because I wanted to be punitive, but because there was still the question of the criminal referral, the question of what had been done not just to me, but in a manner that constituted fraud against my son, and I was not going to shake hands and call it even because it was not even. Aprilcame. I had been at the new firm for 5 months, and I was good at my job, and my manager had started CCing me on things she didn't have to CC me on, which is a particular kind of professional acknowledgement that I recognized and appreciated. I had also, carefully, and with Claudia's guidance, begun quietly networking. There was a professional conference in May, the New England Financial Integrity Summit, a 2-day event in Boston that drew senior people from accounting and legal and financial services. Claudia knew someone on the planning committee. I was offered a slot on a panel about forensic accounting and trustee accountability. I almost didn't do it. I want to be honest about that. The panel topic was uncomfortably close to my own situation, and I was not sure I could speak about trustee fraud without my voice doing something I didn't want it to do in front of 400 people. But then I found out that my father had also registered for the conference. He sat on the board of a regional financial services association, and this was their annual gathering. He would be there. Aaron would probably be there too. I accepted the panel invitation. I did not tell my father I was speaking. I did not tell Aaron. I said nothing to anyone in my family. I prepared my presentation, which was a case study in trustee fraud patterns, real cases, anonymized, with data points drawn partly from my own situation in ways that no one who didn't know would recognize. I had it reviewed by Claudia and 2 colleagues, and I rehearsed it until I could deliver it without notes and without my voice doing the thing I was afraid of. The conference was on a Thursday and Friday. I drove to Boston on the Wednesday night and stayed in the hotel and ordered room service and called Eli before his bedtime. He told me Eli was missing Mommy. I told him Mommy would be home Friday. He said okay, and then asked if we could have pancakes. And I said yes, any pancake configuration he wanted. He said he wanted a dinosaur-shaped one, and I said I would figure it out. I slept better that night than I had slept in months. The panel was Friday afternoon, last session of the day, which meant the room was full of people who had just spent 2 days sitting through presentations and were ready for something that held their attention. I was third of 4 panelists. The moderator introduced me by my title and firm and credentials, and I stepped up and I began. I spoke for 18 minutes. I spoke about the specific mechanics of trustee fraud, about how it is most commonly executed within families, about the psychological factors that allow victims to remain blind to it longer than they should, about the documentation patterns that reveal it, about the legal remedies and their limitations. I was precise and calm and thorough. I did not look at the audience until about 4 minutes in, because I had found in rehearsal that looking up too early made me lose my train of thought. When I did look up, I found my father immediately. He was in the 4th row. Center. He was very still. Aaron was 2 seats to his right. My father's expression was the one I recognized from the night on the porch, that rapid calculation, that flicker of something moving behind his eyes. I held eye contact for 1 moment. Just one. Then I looked back at my slides. At the 13-minute mark I said this. The case I want to close with is one that is currently in litigation, so I'll keep the details limited. But I think it illustrates something important about what these cases cost beyond the money. A 32-year-old man worked for 8 years to make sure his family would be protected if something happened to him. Something happened to him. His wife, a forensic accountant, trusted the wrong person to steward that protection. $630,000 moved out of a trust meant for a 4-year-old child in the span of 9 months. The documentation was fabricated. The trustee was the wife's own father. You could hear the room shift. That particular quality of silence that is not absence of sound but the presence of held breath. She noticed, I said. That's the point I want to make. She was grieving and exhausted, and she was 29 years old. And she noticed, because she did the work, because she looked at the numbers when it would have been so much easier not to. And now she is in court, and the money is coming back, and her father is facing a criminal referral, and her son, who is 4.5 and very fond of dinosaurs, is going to be okay. I paused. I looked up. She asked me to tell you that, I said. She said to say, do the work. Even when it's the hardest thing. Do the work. I stepped back from the podium. The moderator thanked me and moved to the next panelist, and I sat down and I did not look at my father again. I did not need to. I could feel the awareness in the room, the shift in how people were looking at that 4th row, and I knew that in an industry where reputation is the primary currency, what had just happened was not nothing. After the panel ended, there was a reception. I stood near the windows with a glass of water, and several people came to talk to me. A senior partner from a Boston firm, a woman from the Connecticut Attorney General's office who handed me her card, a man who introduced himself as a journalist, covering financial crimes for a regional publication, and asked if I would be willing to be interviewed. I said I would be in touch. My father did not approach me. Aaron did not approach me. I saw my father once across the room, talking to someone, and his back was to me, and his posture had something in it I had not seen before, something contracted, like a man trying to take up less space than he usually did. Claudia called me that evening. She said she had heard from my father's attorney again. The number they were offering now was full restoration plus legal fees, plus an additional payment for damages. She said, "Maya, I think we should talk about this one." I asked if the criminal referral would still proceed regardless of the civil settlement. She said yes, that was separate, that was out of our hands now. I said then let her draw up the agreement. I drove home to Connecticut on Friday evening. I picked up Eli from Dana's at 9 o'clock, and he was half asleep, and he wrapped his arms around my neck, and I stood in Dana's doorway, holding him and breathing him in. Dana stood behind him with her arms crossed, and she looked at me with the look she has perfected over 15 years of friendship, which communicates both "I'm proud of you" and "tell me everything" in one expression. "How did it go?" she said. "We're going to be okay," I said. She nodded like that was never in question. I love her for that. My father's criminal case is ongoing. I don't talk about it much, not publicly, because Claudia has asked me to let the process work. What I can say is that the civil settlement was signed in June, and the trust has been restored, and there is now a professional trustee, not a family member overseeing it, and Eli's future is safe, in the way that Marcus always meant for it to be safe. I think about Marcus a lot. Not in the consuming way I used to, not the way where every thought of him was also a wound. More the way you think about someone who was fundamentally good in a world that is not always fundamentally good, where the memory of that goodness is a kind of compass. He would have been furious about what my father did. He would have been quiet about it the way he was quiet when he was furious. That particular stillness. And then he would have sat with me at the kitchen table and gone through every document and helped me figure out what to do next. That's what I kept thinking about, those 11 months. I kept thinking, what would Marcus do? And the answer was always the same. He would look at the numbers. He would be careful and thorough, and he would not stop until it was right. I bought Eli a dinosaur pancake pan in June. It makes 4 at a time, each one a different species: Triceratops, Stegosaurus, T-Rex, Brontosaurus. On Saturday mornings, he stands on his step stool at the counter and tells me which dinosaur is going on each plate, and I make them. And he is very serious about this task, deeply invested in the accuracy of the distribution, and I am enormously grateful for every ordinary moment of it. He asked me last week if we were rich. I thought about that for a second, and I said not exactly rich, but safe. He said, "What does safe mean?" I said it means we have enough, and nobody can take it, and Daddy made sure of it before he left. He thought about this while eating his Stegosaurus. Then he said, "I want to be an accountant like you when I grow up." And I said, "You can be anything you want." And he said, "No, I want to be an accountant, so I can find where the money went." I started laughing, and I couldn't stop for a full minute, and he watched me with great satisfaction, clearly delighted that he had produced this reaction, and then he picked up his Brontosaurus and took a large bite and said, "Eli is very good at accounting. He is his father's son. He is going to be just fine." My father called me in July. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that started with, "I hope we can find a way to move forward as a family," and ended with something about Eli needing a grandfather. I listened to it once. Then I deleted it. I didn't agonize over it. I didn't call Dana to talk through my feelings about it. I just deleted it, the same way you delete a message that doesn't belong to you anymore, and I went to make dinner. Aaron has not called. I still think about that night, sometimes standing on my father's street with a dead phone, and someone else's keys in someone else's pocket, and the cold coming through my coat. I think about the decision I made on that porch to walk instead of wait, To move instead of stand there hoping something would change. 6 blocks to a 7. 11. One woman who stopped her car. 11 months of work after that. The work is the whole thing. That's what I would tell anyone who is standing where I was standing. Not the dramatic moment. Not the public confrontation. Not the settlement check. The work that happens in the quiet hours. At 2 in the morning. With the bank statement spread across the table and your child asleep in the next room. That's where it turns. That's where you decide who you are and what you're going to do about what was done to you. I decided. And that made all the difference.